Mariah had always believed that dreams were not something a person simply wished for, they were something a person worked for every single day. She grew up in a small apartment on the south side of the city, where the paint on the walls was fading and the elevator worked only when it wanted to. Her mother worked long hours as a home health aide, and from a young age, Mariah understood what responsibility looked like. Money was never enough, but love and discipline filled their home. Her mother often told her, "If you want a different life, you must be willing to work harder than everyone else." Those words stayed in Mariah's heart as she grew older. While other teenagers spent weekends at malls or parties, she spent hers studying, helping her mother, or taking small part-time jobs to save money. Cooking became her escape. In their tiny kitchen, she experimented with simple ingredients, turning rice, beans, and discounted vegetables into meals that made her mother smile after a long shift. She watched cooking videos online late at night and wrote down recipes in a worn notebook. She dreamed of becoming a professional chef one day, maybe even owning her own restaurant. But dreams like that required money, education, and opportunity, things that did not come easily in her neighborhood. After graduating high school with good grades, Mariah knew she could not afford culinary school right away. Instead of giving up, she made a plan. She applied for a job at one of the most popular restaurants downtown, a place known for its elegant setting and wealthy customers. Getting hired there felt like her first real step towards something bigger. The restaurant was nothing like her neighborhood. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, soft music floated through the air, and customers wore suits and expensive dresses. At first, she felt out of place. She worried that people would judge her for her simple background, but she quickly decided that she would not let fear control her future. She memorized the menu faster than anyone else, learned how each dish was prepared, and practiced speaking confidently to guests. Mariah arrived early for every shift and often stayed late if someone needed help. She carried heavy trays without complaining, handled rude customers with patience, and treated every guest with respect, no matter how they treated her. Some coworkers only worked for tips, but for Mariah, this job meant much more. Every dollar she earned went into a savings account labeled culinary school. She refused to touch that money for anything else. Her manager began to notice her dedication. He saw how customers often asked to sit in her section because she was kind and attentive. She remembered regular guests' favorite drinks and asked about their families. Even on days when her feet ached and her back hurt, she kept smiling, because she believed that consistency would eventually open a door. At night, after finishing long shifts, she would return home exhausted, but she still opened her notebook to study recipes. She researched cooking techniques, watched interviews with famous chefs, and imagined herself wearing a white chef's coat with her name stitched on it. Sometimes doubt tried to enter her mind, especially when bills piled up or when unexpected expenses forced her to give part of her paycheck to help her mother. But she never allowed those moments to break her spirit. To Mariah, this job was not just about serving food, it was her classroom. She observed how the kitchen operated, how chefs communicated under pressure, how managers handled complaints. She asked questions whenever she could, eager to learn everything. Some coworkers laughed at her ambition, telling her she was just a server, but she refused to let labels define her future. She understood something important that many people overlooked. Success was not built in one big moment, it was built in small, unseen sacrifices, in early mornings, in tired feet, in choosing discipline over comfort. She believed that if she kept showing up and giving her best, eventually someone would notice. The city lights looked different to her now. They no longer represented a world she could not reach, they represented possibilities. Each shift brought her closer to her goal. Even if progress felt slow, she held on to hope tightly, because hope was free, and no one could take it from her. Mariah's dream was simple but powerful. She wanted to create food that told a story, food that brought people together the way her simple meals had brought comfort to her mother. She wanted to prove that a girl from a struggling neighborhood could rise through hard work and determination. Every tray she carried, every table she cleaned, every smile she forced when she was tired, all of it was part of something bigger. She was building a future step by step, dollar by dollar, shift by shift. She did not know when her breakthrough would come, but she believed with all her heart that it would. For Mariah, the dream was alive, and as long as she kept working, it would stay alive. The rumor started as a whisper in the kitchen, soft but powerful enough to change the mood of the entire restaurant. By the time it reached the server station, it had turned into something much bigger. A famous food critic was coming that night. No one knew what he looked like, and no one knew which table he would sit at, but everyone understood one thing clearly: if he liked the service, the restaurant's reputation would rise. And if he didn't, it could fall overnight. For most of the staff, it was just another stressful evening. For Mariah, it felt like destiny knocking quietly on the door. She had been waiting for a moment like this, a chance to prove that she was more than just another server carrying plates. Earlier that week, her manager had called her into his office. He told her that the restaurant was considering promoting one server to floor supervisor. It would mean higher pay, more responsibility, and more direct contact with the kitchen team. The position would also look impressive on any future culinary school application. Mariah tried to remain calm while he spoke, but inside her heart was racing. "You've been consistent," he told her. "Keep performing like this, and we'll see." Those words replayed in her mind all day. Keep performing like this. That promotion was not just a new title, it was proof that her hard work was being noticed. It was another step toward her bigger dream. On the night the critic was expected, the restaurant felt different. The crystal chandeliers seemed to shine brighter, the tables were polished twice instead of once, even the chefs moved with extra focus, double-checking every plate before it left the kitchen. Mariah arrived an hour early. She carefully ironed her uniform at home and made sure her shoes were spotless. She tied her hair neatly and looked at herself in the mirror before leaving. "Tonight matters," she whispered softly. When the doors opened, guests began flowing in. The sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter filled the air. Every time a new customer entered, the staff exchanged nervous glances, wondering if that person was the critic. Mariah moved gracefully between tables, greeting guests with confidence and warmth. She described dishes with detail and passion, explaining flavors as if she had cooked them herself. Customers smiled at her energy, some even complimented her professionalism. Each positive reaction boosted her confidence. Inside, however, she felt the pressure building. What if she made a mistake? What if she spilled a drink? What if the critic was sitting in her section and she didn't even realize it? At one point, she noticed a sharply dressed man sitting alone at table 12, observing everything quietly. He wasn't looking at his phone like most guests. Instead, he watched the staff carefully, writing something in a small notebook. Mariah's heart skipped a beat. Could that be him? She approached the table calmly, hiding her nerves behind a polite smile. She greeted him warmly and recommended the chef special, speaking clearly and confidently. The man nodded without much expression, but he seemed to listen closely to every word she said. Back in the kitchen, whispers continued spreading. Some servers were rushing too fast and making small errors. One forgot a side dish, another mixed up two orders. The tension was affecting everyone. But Mariah reminded herself of something important. She had prepared for this, not just tonight, but for months. Every double shift, every late-night study session, every moment she chose discipline over comfort had led her here. She focused on what she could control: her attitude, her effort, her service. She checked on her tables at the right time, refilled drinks before guests had to ask, and handled small complaints quickly and politely. The manager walked past her section several times, observing quietly. She could feel his eyes watching, measuring her performance, judging whether she was truly ready for more responsibility. As the night grew busier, the pressure reached its peak. Orders piled up, the kitchen grew louder, and the dining room was completely full. Yet Mariah refused to let panic take over. She moved with purpose, calm and steady, like someone who understood that this was her test. In her heart, she believed that this could be the turning point of her life. If she impressed the right person tonight, doors could open faster than she had ever imagined. She did not know that fate had already planned something far bigger than a promotion, something that would test not just her professional skills, but her character, her values, and the true meaning of her dream. At that moment, though, all she knew was this: she had never wanted success more than she did that night, and she was ready to fight for it with everything she had. The sound did not belong in a place filled with soft music and polite laughter. It was sharp, heavy, and final, like something breaking that could not be easily fixed. For a second, no one understood what had happened. Forks paused halfway to mouths, conversations froze in mid-sentence, and every head slowly turned toward the entrance. Near the polished marble floor, an elderly man lay motionless beside a small overturned chair. His cane had rolled a few feet away, spinning in a slow, lonely circle before falling still. The peaceful rhythm of the restaurant shattered instantly. Mariah had just picked up 2 steaming plates from the kitchen when she heard the crash. The noise cut through her focus like a knife. She stepped out from behind the service station and saw the crowd beginning to gather. Some guests stood up slightly from their seats, stretching their necks to see better. Others whispered nervously, but no one moved close enough to help. The elderly man attempted to lift himself, but his arm trembled and gave out beneath him. A thin line of blood appeared near his temple where it had struck the floor. His breathing sounded uneven, shallow and strained. For a brief moment, everything slowed down in Mariah's mind. The plates in her hands suddenly felt heavier than ever. Her manager's earlier words echoed faintly in her head about the important guest rumored to be watching, the promotion, the opportunity, the future she had been working toward. It all stood on one side of her thoughts. On the other side was a human being lying helpless on a cold floor. The manager's voice broke through the silence, sharp and urgent. "Someone call emergency services," he shouted from across the room, yet he did not step forward himself. He was scanning the dining area, clearly worried about the customers' reactions, about the image of the restaurant, about the critic who could be sitting anywhere. A hostess hesitated near the entrance, unsure whether to approach. A busboy took one nervous step forward, then stopped, as if waiting for permission. Mariah felt her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked down at the plates again. The food was perfectly arranged, sauces carefully placed, garnishes bright and fresh. One of those plates belonged to table 12, the table she suspected might hold the critic. If she walked away now, those dishes would grow cold, customers would complain, the manager would notice. But if she did nothing, she would have to live with that choice long after tonight ended. Without allowing herself another second to overthink, she placed the plates carefully on the nearest empty table, ignoring the confused look from the guests sitting there. Then she moved quickly toward the fallen man, her footsteps steady despite the tension filling the air. As she knelt beside him, the cold marble pressed through the fabric of her uniform. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently, keeping her voice calm even though her pulse was racing. The man blinked slowly, his eyes unfocused at first, then settling on her face. He tried to speak but struggled, his hand searched weakly against the floor. "I'm right here," Mariah said softly, taking his trembling hand in hers. "Help is coming." She quickly checked if he could move his legs and asked if he felt pain anywhere specific. Remembering basic first aid steps she had once learned in school, a small crowd had formed now, but most people were still watching from a safe distance. Some even lifted their phones slightly, unsure whether to record or react. From across the room, her manager's expression tightened. He gestured toward the dining area as if reminding her silently of her unfinished responsibilities. Mariah saw the signal, but she did not stand up. The elderly man winced, trying again to sit up, but she gently encouraged him to remain still. "Please don't move too much," she said reassuringly, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeve. Time felt strange in that moment. The elegant restaurant with its sparkling glasses and expensive meals no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was the fragile life depending on her presence. In the distance, sirens began to grow louder. Their rising sound brought both relief and new anxiety. Guests began returning to their seats, murmuring about delays and ruined dinners. Mariah stayed exactly where she was, holding the man's hand until the paramedics rushed through the entrance. Taking control of the situation with professional speed, they asked her quick questions about what happened, and she answered clearly, still kneeling beside him. As they carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, the man's eyes found hers once more. There was something in his gaze, something deeper than simple gratitude, but she did not have time to understand it. When the ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the night, the restaurant felt different, not just disrupted, but changed. Mariah slowly stood up, smoothing her apron, aware of the stares around her. She could already sense that this single decision, made in less than a minute, had shifted the direction of her carefully planned evening. She had chosen compassion without knowing the cost. And she was about to find out exactly how expensive that choice would be. Mariah's mind was racing, but her movements were calm and deliberate. Every step, every gesture was focused on helping the elderly man on the cold marble floor. She knelt beside him, her uniform brushing against the hard tiles, and spoke in a soft, steady voice. "Sir, I'm here, you're safe now, can you tell me if anything hurts?" He tried to sit up, but his strength was gone. His hands trembled as they searched for something solid to hold onto. Mariah gently placed her hand over his, supporting him, guiding him to lie still until help arrived. She noticed a thin trickle of blood forming at his temple, and her stomach tightened, but she refused to let panic take over. This was a moment that demanded clarity, not fear. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with tension. Guests whispered nervously, some casting furtive glances, some were trying to pretend they hadn't seen anything, others were filming with their phones, hesitant but unable to look away. The staff moved stiffly, unsure whether to continue their duties or help. The manager's sharp eyes tracked her every move, his face a mixture of irritation and disbelief. Mariah ignored them all. Her focus was absolute. Her training in first aid, minimal though it was, guided her hands. She checked the man's pulse, felt his breathing, spoke words of reassurance. "Help is on the way, you're not alone." Her voice was firm but kind, as though she were speaking to a frightened child. Though the man was tall and frail, his presence demanding respect. Minutes stretched, but in reality, it was only moments before the sound of sirens cut through the tension. A wave of relief passed through the room, but Mariah didn't move. She remained beside him, holding his hand until paramedics arrived, listening carefully to their instructions, answering every question clearly, giving every detail she could remember. The paramedics quickly assessed the situation, placing the man carefully on a stretcher, and Mariah helped guide them. She adjusted the blankets over him, brushed stray strands of hair from his forehead, and made sure he was secure. She didn't step back even when the restaurant's manager called her name sharply from across the room, reminding her of unfinished tables and pending orders. Her mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on the man in front of her. On the ground, she had forgotten about the promotion, the critic, the customers, the tips. Everything else had faded, leaving only this human being who depended on her courage and care. When the paramedics finally lifted him toward the ambulance, the man's eyes met hers. For a brief moment, it felt as though he was trying to communicate something beyond words. Gratitude, yes, but also something else, something deeper, a quiet recognition of the sacrifice she had made. Mariah straightened up, her heart still pounding, her uniform a little dusty, and her shoes slightly scuffed. Guests whispered behind their hands, murmuring praise or curiosity, some still confused about what had happened, others muttered complaints about the delay, their meals cooling too quickly. Their voices barely registered with her, because in that moment, she knew she had done the right thing. The manager approached her, his expression tight, a mix of frustration and disbelief etched into every line of his face. "Mariah," he said, his voice controlled but sharp, "we'll need to discuss your actions tonight." She nodded, understanding the words carried the weight of consequence, but she didn't feel fear, only resolve. She had chosen kindness over convenience, compassion over career convenience. Later, when the restaurant had settled down and the kitchen had returned to its usual rhythm, Mariah cleaned the tables she had left, carefully rearranged chairs, and made sure everything looked as if nothing had happened. Yet she could feel the tension in the air, the way whispers followed her steps, and the way the staff glanced her way with a mix of admiration and judgment. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to reflect on what she had just done. It had been a split-second decision, yet it felt like the most important choice she had ever made. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the fragile form of the man on the marble, the thrum of the sirens, the uncertain faces of the paramedics, all blending into a memory that would stay with her forever. Mariah realized then that sometimes the right choice wasn't the easiest, sometimes courage wasn't about strength or skill, but about the willingness to step forward when everyone else stepped back, to care, to act, to risk, even when the outcome was uncertain. And though she didn't know it yet, this single moment of selflessness would ripple far beyond the walls of the restaurant, far beyond the tables and guests and dishes she served. It would change the course of her life in ways she could not yet imagine. The restaurant had settled back into its usual rhythm, but for Mariah, the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. She moved quietly between tables, refilling drinks, clearing plates, and answering questions, yet every step she took reminded her of the moment that had just unfolded. The elderly man on the cold marble, the way his hand had trembled in hers, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Her mind tried to focus on the positive. She had saved a life, she had acted without hesitation, she had done what she believed was right, but the atmosphere around her was heavy with judgment, thinly veiled disappointment, and a sense that not everyone appreciated her choice. It happened just as the evening began to wind down. Her manager called her into the office. His expression was tight, his voice clipped, and there was no trace of the admiration she had secretly hoped for. "Mariah," he said, sliding a crisp piece of paper across the desk, "we need to discuss your actions tonight." She swallowed hard, sensing that this conversation would not end the way she had imagined. The words fell like bricks, each one heavier than the last. He told her that by abandoning her duties, she had put the restaurant's reputation at risk. Some guests had complained about delayed orders, the critic might have left unsatisfied, and in the hospitality industry, perception was everything. His tone was final, leaving no room for debate or explanation. Mariah's chest tightened, a mixture of disbelief and sorrow flooding through her. She had risked everything to help someone in need, yet that courage, that selflessness, was being punished. She tried to explain, to share what had happened, the urgency, the man's injury, the fact that she had stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. Her manager listened, expression unchanged, occasionally glancing at his watch, clearly tired of excuses. "I understand your intentions," he said finally, "but intentions don't pay the bills or fix the image of this restaurant." Then, without another word, he handed her a termination notice. The words on the paper seemed to blur as Mariah stared at them, the ink cutting deeper than any blade. She left the office slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The restaurant that had once been her proving ground now felt cold and unwelcoming. The colleagues who had nodded at her earlier now avoided her gaze, unsure whether to offer sympathy or maintain distance. Some whispered behind their hands, their voices filled with a mixture of judgment and awe. Outside, the night air hit her face like a shock, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The cold seemed to seep into her bones, but Mariah kept walking, her thoughts spinning. She thought of the elderly man, of the hand she had held, of the courage she had summoned in that split-second moment, and yet, she had lost her job, her promotion, and the opportunity she had worked for tirelessly for months. For a moment, the injustice of it all overwhelmed her, but as she continued walking, a strange clarity settled in. She realized that some victories were not measured in money, in titles, or in recognition. Some victories were measured in the choices a person made when no one was watching, in the courage to act when the world demanded convenience over conscience. At home, Mariah sat on her small, worn sofa, staring at the notebook where she had written recipes and ideas for her future restaurant. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to close the notebook. It was a reminder that while one chapter had ended painfully, another had not yet begun. Her mother, noticing her distress, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, baby," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of experience and love. "Sometimes the world doesn't reward courage right away, but that doesn't mean it isn't valuable." Mariah nodded, feeling the truth of her mother's words settle into her heart. She thought about the lessons of this night, the fragility of life, the unpredictability of human judgment, the harsh realities of work and responsibility, but she also thought about the power of compassion, the quiet strength of helping someone in need, even when it came at great personal cost. In that painful moment, Mariah made a promise to herself. She would not let this setback define her. She would continue to work, to learn, to dream, and to act with the same courage she had shown that night. Somewhere beyond the disappointment, she felt a flicker of hope, a quiet assurance that life sometimes rewarded those who dared to do the right thing, even when the world seemed unfair. And as the city lights flickered outside her window, Mariah understood something vital. The path to her dreams would not be easy. It would be filled with challenges, sacrifices, and moments of heartbreak, but she was determined, and nothing, not fear, not failure, not even loss, could take away the courage that had guided her hand that night. She folded the termination notice carefully and placed it in her bag, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a reminder that true courage often comes with a price, and that sometimes, losing one thing was only the first step toward gaining something far greater. Mariah tried to push the events of that night out of her mind, but she couldn't. The image of the elderly man lying helpless on the marble floor, the cold panic in his eyes, the way his trembling hand had clutched hers, kept returning to her thoughts. She had lost her job, yes, and it stung deeply, but the memory of helping someone in need gave her a quiet sense of pride that no one could take away. What she didn't know was that the man she had saved was far more than he appeared. Charles Whitmore, a reclusive billionaire known for his sharp investments and philanthropic ventures, had been watching the world from behind a careful shield of anonymity for decades. Few people knew his face, and fewer still had ever interacted with him personally. He was careful, calculating, and cautious about the people he allowed near him. Yet he was also quietly fascinated by human behavior, observing kindness, honesty, and courage as if they were rare treasures. From his hospital bed, he replayed the moments after his fall, the hand that had reached for him, the voice that had spoken softly and confidently, the calm determination in the young woman's eyes. It had left an impression stronger than he expected. He asked his assistant to find out who she was, and when he learned she had been fired, his curiosity deepened. There was something remarkable about someone willing to act selflessly even when there was no reward, no recognition, and, in fact, personal cost. Mariah, meanwhile, tried to rebuild her life in the days following her dismissal. She scoured job listings, polished her resume, and applied to other restaurants, but the sting of losing the position she had worked so hard for lingered. She thought about how fleeting success could feel, and how quickly the world could turn against someone for doing what they believed was right. She had acted with courage, yet the world had punished her. Charles Whitmore, however, did not see the situation that way. He believed that the true measure of a person was not in how they performed when rewarded, but in how they acted when no one was watching. He asked his team to locate Mariah, to understand her story, and to ensure that her bravery would not go unnoticed. The contrast between the cold, corporate reaction she had received at the restaurant and her act of selfless compassion intrigued him endlessly. Days passed, and Mariah began to accept that life sometimes had its own timing, that a setback did not necessarily mean failure, and that small acts of courage, even unnoticed ones, could have meaning far beyond immediate results. She continued practicing her culinary skills at home, experimenting with new recipes, and saving the little money she earned from small gigs. But she never imagined that someone of Charles Whitmore's influence had taken an interest in her. He reviewed her background, her work ethic, and her story of that night. Every detail confirmed what he had already sensed in the hospital. This was a young woman of extraordinary character, someone rare in a world driven by ambition, ego, and self-interest. He decided that she deserved more than recognition. She deserved opportunity, a chance to prove her potential on a much larger stage. Meanwhile, Mariah was unaware that her life was on the cusp of a transformation she could never have predicted. The universe she thought had been indifferent to her courage had, in fact, been watching, quietly preparing a reward that would not come in the form of a title or a paycheck, but in the form of mentorship, support, and the opening of doors she had only dreamed of walking through. She was about to discover that one act of courage, one decision to act with empathy, could reach further than she had ever imagined, that sometimes, the world had a way of returning kindness in ways so profound that they could change the course of a life forever, and that the man she had helped, the stranger she had acted for without thought of reward, held the key to a future more extraordinary than any dream she had ever allowed herself to imagine. Mariah, in those quiet, uncertain days after losing her job, had no idea that someone was about to change her life forever, someone who had witnessed her courage and valued it far beyond the simple measures of performance or protocol, and the next time she would see him, it would not be as a stranger in distress, but as a man who could unlock the doors to the life she had been working toward all along. Mariah had spent the last week in a fog of uncertainty. Her mornings were filled with scanning job listings, her afternoons with practicing recipes in her tiny kitchen, and her nights with restless thoughts about the events that had cost her so much. The termination notice from the restaurant still sat folded neatly on her desk, a silent reminder of both her loss and her courage. She tried to tell herself that it was just one setback, that there would be other opportunities, but deep down, she felt the sting of disappointment and the gnawing question of what might have been if she had just followed the rules instead of her heart. Then, out of nowhere, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of her apartment. Its tinted windows reflected the city lights like mirrors, and before she could react, a well-dressed assistant stepped out and introduced himself. "Mariah Jackson," he asked politely, holding a tablet with her name on it. "Mr. Whitmore would like to see you at his office downtown." Her heart skipped a beat. The name was unfamiliar at first, but something deep inside her stirred, a memory of the elderly man she had helped, the fall, the trembling hand, the reassuring words she had whispered. Could it really be him, the stranger whose life she had saved, reaching out to her now? Nervous and unsure what to expect, she accepted the invitation, hoping it wasn't some sort of misunderstanding. She stepped into the car, the city lights passing in a blur as the sedan sped through traffic. Every second felt like an eternity. and her mind raced with questions. Could he really be offering her something, or was this just a courtesy meeting, a polite acknowledgement before her life returned to its ordinary course? When she arrived, the building towered above her, glass panels reflecting the sky, the city, and her own anxious expression. The receptionist directed her to a private elevator, and within moments, she was stepping into a spacious, modern office, walls lined with books and framed photographs of historic accomplishments and charitable ventures. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, a scent of quiet power and careful wealth. And then she saw him, Charles Whitmore, sitting behind a large oak desk, looking both formal and approachable. His eyes were sharp but carried a softness she hadn't expected. As she stepped closer, he rose slightly, offering a nod of recognition. "Mariah," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "thank you for what you did." She blinked, almost speechless. I was just trying to help," she said softly, unsure whether words could truly convey what had happened. He smiled faintly, as though he understood the humility behind her statement. "Most people would have walked away," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Many would have worried only about themselves, about the tips, the promotion, or the fear of getting in trouble." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But you acted with courage, with integrity, and without hesitation. That is rare in this world." Mariah felt warmth spreading through her chest, but also a knot of anxiety. She hadn't expected gratitude to come from someone like him, someone so removed from her world. She stammered, "I didn't think about that. I just wanted to make sure he was okay." Whitmore's eyes softened. "And that's exactly why I want to meet you, Mariah. I believe in rewarding people who act with heart, who demonstrate the kind of character that can change lives, not just their own, but the lives of others around them." He gestured toward a chair in front of his desk, inviting her to sit, and she did, her mind swirling with disbelief, excitement, and a hint of fear. "I know you lost your job after that night," he continued, "and I understand the unfairness of it, but I want to offer you something far greater than a single restaurant position. I want to invest in your future, to give you the chance to attend culinary school fully funded, and to help launch a new restaurant that I am planning, one built on the values you showed that night: compassion, courage, and integrity." Mariah's hands trembled slightly, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. This was more than a second chance, it was a leap forward into a life she had only dreamed about. She had acted selflessly without expecting reward, and now the universe, in the form of this man, was returning that courage in ways she could never have imagined. Tears threatened to spill, but she fought to stay composed. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Whitmore smiled warmly. "Then say yes, Mariah, say yes to the opportunity, and show the world what you're capable of." In that moment, the weight of the past week, the loss, the uncertainty, the fear, lifted, replaced by hope, possibility, and the exhilarating realization that her life was about to change forever. Mariah realized that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, performed in quiet moments without expectation, could create ripples far larger than anyone could predict, and that the courage to act, even when the consequences were uncertain, could open doors that no amount of planning or ambition alone could ever reach. She took a deep breath, nodded, and whispered, "Yes," knowing, in that instant, that everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, was finally within reach. Mariah felt a rush of emotions she had never experienced before: excitement, disbelief, gratitude, and a sense of awe so powerful it made her stomach flutter. She had imagined countless scenarios in her mind over the past week, but nothing had prepared her for this moment, sitting across from Charles Whitmore, the man whose life she had saved, now offering her a future she had only dreamed about. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, studying her with a calm intensity. "Mariah," he said, "I've seen many people work hard, many people chase dreams, but few act with the courage and compassion you demonstrated that night. You didn't think about promotions, recognition, or even your own safety. You acted because it was the right thing to do, and that is why I want to help you." Mariah blinked, trying to steady her voice. I never expected anything in return. I wanted to help him," she said softly, thinking back to the elderly man's trembling hand, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the fear and trust in his eyes. It had been a moment of instinct, pure and unthinking, yet now it seemed like it had changed the trajectory of her life. Whitmore smiled. "Exactly, Mariah, and that is precisely why you are different. That is why I want to invest in you, not just with money, but with guidance, mentorship, and opportunity. I want you to attend the culinary school of your choice, fully funded, and after that, I want you to join me in opening a new restaurant, one that embodies the principles you demonstrated: integrity, empathy, and excellence." Her heart raced, and for a moment, she could hardly breathe. She thought of the long nights she had spent studying recipes, the double shifts at the restaurant, the tips she had painstakingly saved for culinary school, all of it, all those sacrifices, and tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. This was more than a second chance, it was the fulfillment of a dream she had been chasing for years. Whitmore leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Mariah, this isn't just about money or opportunity, it's about creating something meaningful, a place where people feel valued, where integrity and kindness matter as much as skill and talent. I've watched too many people chase titles and money while losing sight of what truly matters, but you remind me that it is possible to build success with heart." Mariah swallowed, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then say yes," Whitmore said simply, smiling warmly. "Say yes to the opportunity, say yes to the future you've been working so hard for, and say yes to yourself." Mariah took a deep breath, steadying her racing thoughts. Her mind flashed back to every moment that had led her here, the first day she stepped into that fancy restaurant, the countless double shifts, the long nights practicing recipes at home, and most vividly, the moment she had knelt beside a stranger on a cold marble floor, choosing compassion over convenience. "Yes," she said finally, her voice firm, her heart swelling. "Yes, I'll do it." Whitmore nodded, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Good, because this is only the beginning, Mariah, only the beginning of what I hope will be a remarkable journey, together." The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Her life was changing in ways she had never imagined, not because she had been lucky, but because she had acted with courage and integrity when it mattered most. She realized then that sometimes the world rewarded people not for talent alone, not for ambition alone, but for the quiet bravery to do what is right when no one is watching. Mariah's thoughts turned to the restaurant she had left behind, to the manager who had fired her, to the customers and the critic, and she smiled quietly, knowing that what had seemed like a devastating loss was actually a stepping stone, a test of character that had revealed her true worth. Whitmore stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to this new chapter, Mariah, let's create something extraordinary." She took his hand, feeling the weight of possibility in that simple gesture, and in that moment, she understood the truth of everything she had worked for, the dreams she had nurtured in a tiny apartment, the countless hours of effort, the sacrifices she had made. They had all led to this moment, a moment where courage met opportunity, and a life she had once only imagined became real. As she left the office later that evening, the city lights reflecting in the rain-slick streets, Mariah felt a sense of hope and purpose she had never known before. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, that challenges awaited, but she also knew she was ready, and that the universe had a way of rewarding those who act with heart. For Mariah, the end of one chapter, the loss of her job, had become the beginning of an extraordinary new chapter, a life filled with possibility, promise, and the knowledge that sometimes, a single act of courage can change everything.